Okay, next session is the executive panel. And I think we need a couple of minutes to bring some chairs up and get organized here and get the panelists on stage as well. So just bear with me when we get that arranged. We have three leaders and executives from Cisco here joining me today. I'm going to be asking some questions. We also have Slido, so bring out your phone, make sure you're connected to Slido, be ready to post your questions, and I'll try to incorporate them during the session. So before we get started, or with the question at least, maybe you can just give like a 1-minute introduction to yourselves, so who are on these hot seats. Would you like to begin, Rana?
Yes, sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Rana Kazamel, and I'm responsible for the service provider automation portfolio from a product management perspective.
Okay. Will Eatherton. So I'm on the engineering side and run engineering for Cisco networking, which includes the Meraki and Catalyst on the campus areas, Thousand Eyes, the Nexus portfolio in the data center, and then the Cisco 8000 and the service provider portfolio for telcos and for web scale.
Hello, everyone. I'm Guru Shenoy. I'm responsible for product management for service providers, which includes routing and automation, and also our hyperscaler segment.
Very good, excellent. So we have three executives here willing to share their own perspectives on various topics in the context of network automation and other things that Cisco does, right? So I wanted to begin with a question around hyperscalers. So Guru, you mentioned hyperscalers. They are often referred to as kind of the pinnacle of automated businesses, right? Is there something we can learn from them in how they automate their networks, how they run their networks, the things they do, which would be applicable to companies which are more, normal companies who are not at the hyperscale? So, Will, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure, I'll start. I think the answer is yes and no. So, it's probably been a good, 7 or 8 years since the beginning of sort of hyperscalers are at the pinnacle. I think there's certainly lessons and aspects that are applicable across the industry. Generally striving for as much homogeneity as possible in architecture, being as simple as possible. Trying to have good security practices, upgrading regularly. I think there's a lot of things. I think at the same time, in the past few years, there's been a growing realization of, hey, there are some fundamental differences. They typically go beyond automation. They often have significant software teams that are building controllers and software architectures. They typically do not have, except for with some experiments, the last mile. They generally don't have as much of a multi-generational networks. They tend to really cap and architect separately. So I think in those contexts, we've seen actually on the hyperscaler things transition a little bit where for data center, there are the leaf spine rolls that they're, a significant exercise around the controller. But when it comes to internetworking, WAN, that they, have many similarities with telcos and aspects. So in that aspect, I think, we've seen them, maybe even come back a little bit towards more commonality with the rest of the industry. So Guru, any?
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think the homogeneity is a key factor, right? As much as they can make designs very cookie cutter and then stamp them out, it helps them scale, it makes their networks more resilient. So that's something we definitely see a lot of universally across our hyperscaler base. And then even their redundancy and resiliency models, right? Who here likes ISSU, right? Hyperscalers do not like ISSU as it applies to individual infrastructure components being completely redundant and self-contained. They use network redundancy models, just as an example. And then the third thing is a lot of emphasis on infrastructure providing APIs and all of that, right? To Will's point about them trying to use more controllers and such to manage the network. We see a lot of that, and that's where we've been investing a lot as well, right? Open config data models and so forth. So there are some of these elements that we see replicated across. I do agree with Will. The data center networks are completely cookie cutter. When it comes to the WAN, it starts looking more and more like SPs. Now, I do realize that there are some constraints that SPs have that hyperscalers do not. For example, SPs often have single-homed customer endpoint devices, so it's hard to do redundancy, network-level redundancy when you have those kinds of scenarios. But to the extent you can follow some of these principles, I think certainly SPs stand to gain a lot from what the hyperscalers have done with their networks.
So we spoke a lot about, we had a couple of sessions before here earlier today about mindset. The mindset of companies is important, and also now Fredrik was speaking about people and process aspects. So when you think about the hyperscalers and their mindset, what can we learn from them? I've never really worked with a hyperscaler myself, but I get the impression that they are extremely software savvy, software first, automation first kind of mindsets before anything. But I don't know if you share that view.
A couple quick things come to mind. I think, and to Guru's point, I think there is, like on API front, there is a lot of focus of what is the failure, what are the limits, what are the failure modes, how do we validate and test those up front. So assume that there will be failures. What's the most graceful way to handle that? What will be the sequence of events? How do you avoid cascading failures, and then documenting those up front? So there's a lot of time spent before the root cause analysis to try to understand what are going to be the reasons that there are those issues, and quite a bit of process around prep for failures and failure analysis. So that's something I've seen quite a bit.
Yeah, and I'll just add to the point that couple of our earlier speakers made, right? Vasco of Liberty Global said this. Luis Andres also said this. There's a lot of willingness to move quickly, fail fast, and try again, right? Some of the teams that we see that we work with in the hyperscaler environments, they're incredibly chaotic, but they keep moving fast, iterating and improving upon that. So, certainly just getting to the point of starting something and working your way past it we see that willingness to do a lot more there.
Okay, that's a very interesting perspective. I don't think I have a lot of experience seeing in traditional SPs, kind of the fail fast mentality. It's very rigorous, process-driven work most of the time. So definitely a big difference. So Guru, I mean, you're overseeing a networking roadmap worth many, many billions of dollars, right? And we spoke about complexity here during the day. Many service providers are, challenged just running their today's networks, trying to decommission the old. And then comes Cisco and other vendors with lots of new network innovation, right? That we're pushing. Are networks getting more complex to run as we move along as an industry, or is there innovation at the network layer that is really simplifying for our customers in our roadmaps?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think certainly the scale of networks is increasing, right? And that adds complexity in and of itself. But one of the reasons why we see complexity increase is something that Will mentioned earlier. You have multiple generations of devices, a lot of legacy devices that have been there in the network for 8, 9 years, maybe more. And then you have some of the latest technologies, but you can't really adopt them in the network because the older equipment may not support it. So to the extent that you can go to newer generations, there is a lot of work, I think, from a simplification perspective that's happening. If you just look at some of the things that we at Cisco have introduced in the past few years, right? Delayering IP and optical networks through our routed optical networking infrastructure. You take away entire systems now that you don't have to manage anymore. There's obviously economic benefits of doing that, but there's also that architectural simplicity. Something that Clarence was mentioning earlier. Going native SRv6, taking all of that protocol layer cake away so that you can then simplify how you provide services, which also extend end to end, makes it much easier to provide that. So my sense is that the technologies are available to move towards being in a very simplified manner, implementing services and so forth, complemented by all the telemetry and controllers, et cetera, that we're building it. But it's really up to end customers to figure out how they can transition to a future state architecture which allows them to leverage that.
So some of these things that you mentioned, like routed optical networking, bringing IP and optical layers together, et cetera, is obviously a great way of simplifying the technology stack. It doesn't necessarily simplify the human stack on top of it, right?
True.
So how do you see, when making decisions about new disruptive kind of technologies and roadmap,
Yeah.
do you factor in the operational piece into that? Is this something that actually customers can bring on board easily and deploy? Or is there like a trade-off in between,
Yeah.
this is the best thing for the network equipment, for, shipping the packets back and forth versus, the operational aspect of it?
Yeah, no, I mean, excellent question again, right? And I'll let maybe Will and Rana chime in with their thoughts on this as well. But tooling is one part of it, and I think Luis Andres of Masarange said this best, right? It's not just the tool set is one aspect, but then you have the people, you have the operations culture, you have the network. So you have to look at all these pieces together. Absolutely, the mindset conversations are extremely critical. I think folks here, you guys are perhaps more forward-leaning in terms of willingness to adopt these new things, but we don't see that universally across ops teams in service providers. We have the tooling for the most part, and it continues to evolve in the right direction, right? To go with the network infrastructure, we now have controllers, we have the right API layers that we are building to for that interplay between the two of that. But at the end of the day, the operations teams have to have the willingness. There has to be top-down commitment to, for example, if you're delayering IP and optical and putting them together, those two organizations need to work together. Right, so those kinds of things have to be done in order to realize the full benefits.
And on that topic, I remember when we went through the routed optical networking is actually maybe the third time that this has been attempted in the industry over 2 decades. We absolutely had the discussions of, what's going to be different this time? Should we be investing? How all in we should go? And to your point of mindset, certainly in the past there's been a topic of, the optical teams have a very clear architecture with OTN. There's a structure, it's been there, that works. Why is it going to be good enough to warrant a change? And when we went through the cost economics and looked at eliminating those layers and the benefits, we thought yes it is. Now on the other hand, if what we just offer them is a iOS XR box and a CLI, this isn't going to happen. And so several years ago we went that we did need to provide a very heavy automation layer that would blend from an IP and optical. We need to get into the emulation PLE. So those technologies were all done as a way to help the mindset and the culture adopt something that would have a big gain, but would be hard in some cases.
Like Will said, we've already built all those capabilities. Like, there's no issue from SDN controller or tooling perspective. I think it's more on the processes side, right? Because there's a change. And with the change needs to come adaptation to that change, right? And your processes need to change because the way you're doing things are different, but they're simpler, right? But the fact of just going through that change is what really requires the adaptation. And that's why we've been also working with our CX team very closely to offer consultation services to basically work on the process side of things with our service providers so that they can help them transition from a process and organizational perspective while we make the products available, providing the simplification and the TCO savings.
Yeah. Good point. I was thinking today we heard, about a number of standardization bodies mentioned, like TM Forum, we heard IETF, Metro Ethernet Forum, 3GPP, a number of those, right? And they're all in their different ways trying to standardize things and make it easier for service providers to build up that technology stack and organize them around that. So I think this is a question for you, Rana, who is responsible for the roadmap of many of our products. And you mentioned the telecom infra project yourself, ITF, in your presentation this morning. How do you navigate all of these different standards, all the architecture blueprints? Is there even a way of satisfying, kind of all angles here? How do you pick what to bet on, or can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely can be scary when you listed the 10 different standardization bodies. But the thing is that there are different aspects of standardization, right? So there is standardization of the architecture itself, but then there's standardization of the specific protocols for a specific interface. And that's why you'll find that different bodies are focusing on different aspects. Generically speaking, we really do believe in standards because this is really what enables us to deliver multi-vendor automation. Like we spoke a lot about that earlier today. We do believe that the era of a network vendor just focusing on providing proprietary NMSs or SDN controllers for their own infra is no longer really going to cut it for service providers because the networks are completely multi-vendor, multi-domain, and we've really embraced that. And we actually invest a lot in standards ourselves and help drive them, partnering with our customers. For example, within my team, we've got the co-chair in IETF that helps also navigate a lot of the standardization that we want to drive, and then we take that back in the portfolio and we drive it in the roadmap. So it's absolutely key, and that's what enabled us to do multi-vendor. Obviously, you have to also distill the flooding of standardization bodies and really kind of make the best out of them and focus on really the ones that are the most critical. Obviously, working as well with customers and getting their feedback and partnering together to make sure that we're delivering what they're also looking for.
Yeah. So we heard, I think in several presentations today, that many customers are on this journey towards autonomous networks, right? Which is more like self-healing, self-optimizing, self-X kind of networks. How far along that journey do you think we are from a closed-loop automation perspective? I know we're building some things into our portfolio, but there's the adoption side of things, right? Actually leaving control to technology to drive things or make decisions or closing the loop on things. Where do you think we are as an industry, Rana?
Yeah. So I think we've really evolved pretty well. So I mean, if I don't know, 10 years ago, if you heard those names, probably you'd feel like, okay, this is a lot of marketing. Let's cut the chase and get to what's actually there and what's actually working. The nice thing about it is we sat back and we really laid out what are those functions that you need to fully operationalize the network, the ones that we spoke about earlier today. And if you really focus on building those foundation elements, you can really get to those use cases. Like for example, you mentioned closed loop automation. If we really simplify this, it's really around having the right workflow engine in there where you can go and define what are those closed loop automation use cases that you want to drive. And then you basically help kind of fully automate that with the right monitoring capabilities and the right orchestration that can go drive that closed loop within the network. And these are all capabilities that we have today, right? So it's basically building on that foundation and then building the use cases on those platforms. And the thing about what we've built is it's fully customizable, fully programmable, so that it's not something that's static that needs to come out of the box. It gives you that level of flexibility that every service provider can go define their own use cases and basically get that out using the foundational building blocks that we've got.
So we've got the foundation covered in the automation portfolio. So I want to shift, kind of take the network perspective on kind of autonomous networking. Guru, where do you see network equipment and networks going in terms of capabilities to support autonomous networking? Will network equipment become more autonomous over time, self-driving, self-optimizing, embedding maybe AI for that purpose, or is there going to be the dependency on the kind of orchestration and controller layer, with path computation and things of that may be offloaded into controller also going forward? Where do you see the industry going?
So I think this evolution will continue, right? We are down the path of increasing levels of automation, and I think it's hard to imagine a point at this moment where everything is going to be hands off, right? Where you push a button and the network stands itself up, runs itself, and all of that. I think we are very far away from that point in time. But certainly we are at a point where individual workflows can certainly be made. You can have closed loop automation and have them run autonomously. Now, to your question about, is it going to be the network infrastructure or do we need controllers? My personal view is that you're going to need controllers because infrastructure, routers, switches, in and of themselves, they don't have that end-to-end visibility of services, topology, and all of that. So you need another entity that does that. And this is where controllers come into the picture to absorb all of that telemetry, make decisions that are on a more macro scale that individual network elements cannot. And you see, generally, the industry driving towards that. We are driving towards that with our portfolio. All the stuff that Rana walked through in the morning with our portfolio and the controller focus. We're doing similar things on the data center side as well, and we already have things on the campus side like Meraki and so forth. And that model is very successful. It works very well. It scales well. So I imagine that that's something that will continue to be like a predominant model for simplification and more autonomous.
One use case, as you were going through Guru, that I think of is in for enterprises, the SD-WAN use case. So if you look at the sophistication that we've gotten to as far as how we do path selection for failures, it's really evolved well past the point of just looking at connectivity and raw analytics at a local level. It now takes into account, the access to services, what's the ping time to Office 365. It takes into account a whole range of aspects that is telemetry that does come back to a controller, and that the decision's made. So I think that for that kind of loop time frame, that we will see controllers continue to be the hub, and then really, control plane routing protocols is what the system side should encompass.
All right, very good. Will, I'm going to come to you for the next question. I was listening to your keynote this morning, and you're overseeing a large development organization, right? And you spoke a lot about AI and Gen AI and the opportunity with that. So from where you sit, where do you see the most immediate value with Gen AI, and maybe AI in general, but Gen AI is the new kid on the block, right? You see that mostly in terms of immediate productivity gains for your teams, or do you see the opportunity as biggest in how you can embed AI into the products and make it, new, better products come to market? Where do you see?
Yeah, so I think a simple way to put it is from an overall technology industry standpoint is the easiest gains are ones in which the data is something that Gen AI can work with. And what can Gen AI work with? Well, it's a next token prediction. It's around language. And so things where the data is audio or text is where it just naturally does an awesome job. And so, we have examples today, beyond predictive AI, but in Gen AI, where things relative to WebEx and where we can do things like summarization of meeting and action items because the text is data. Things like developer productivity, code is text. And so being able to provide, what is a suggested new snippet of code is a text base. And so all of those are very straightforward type of use cases. And then chatbots fall into that with natural language in and out. The aspect I was hitting this morning, which is where I'm very excited and where we're getting into, and some of the roadmap items that Rana talked about, is where we start to integrate it more tightly into our controllers. And so it's more around this co-pilot type aspects of, based on current state, what is the suggested way to fill out this form? What is a suggested auto nav? What is a suggested next step or a summarization like the Thousand Eyes example I gave this morning? So I think those we can make gains and show progress very quickly. Yes, but going from text to data and operational data is work, and that's why you're seeing it take a little longer.
All right, we have a question from the audience on AI. Basically, would you dare to give an AI full control over a large network? Any comments on that?
Give what?
Give an AI full control over a large network? Are we gonna
answer no.
Are we gonna see that anytime soon?
No, like I said, I think introducing AI in certain workflows is probably the way to go, right? And then as you learn and iterate and expand your use case, workflow set, however you refer to it, then I think you start, when you start getting comfortable with the AI and make sure you understand how it works and how it's going on, that's where you start expanding. But at this point in time, it would take someone very brave to do what you're suggesting there.
Yeah, I also want to make a shout out for tomorrow. We're going to have an AI panel and several sessions on AI. So look in the agenda for that. And maybe as a final question before we wrap up, maybe Rana, this is for you. As a telecom company, I would like to have smaller features around NSO, but I don't want to bring in CNC. What options do I have to kind of, I guess, take advantage of the Cisco roadmap?
Yeah. No, we're fully committed, and we're not going to change the fact that we also provide NSO or Crosswork Workflow as standalone products, because we obviously do understand that if really what you're looking for is, for example, on NSO, the orchestration capabilities, you can continue to have that as a separate product. So you'll find that any innovation that we do from an orchestration provisioning perspective will continue to be available in NSO standalone as well. We're not really differentiating between NSO standalone versus CNC when it comes to those capabilities. Obviously, once you start to get into other use cases that NSO does not do completely, like service assurance or other aspects, obviously you will need other components. But as long as it's within that provisioning space, you're absolutely free to continue running it separately.
And on behalf of Ron, I'll just say we've also put a lot of work into making CNC easier to install, easier single VM. And if there are any concerns or hesitations, please let us know, because obviously we've built this really around NSO with an intent of helping customers. So if there's concerns, we'd like to understand it so we can address those.
All right, very good. I think we're at the stop. Thank you so much. Let's give the panel a big round of applause.
Thank you.